First of all, I'm Michael Merriman. I grew up in a tiny town west of Fort Worth, south of Wichita Falls, north of Abilene, and east of Stamford, called Throckmorton. The only other famous person from there is Bob Lilly, who played for the Dallas Cowboys before many of you were born. But I grew up in a Methodist church, and we were a pretty old-fashioned evangelical Methodist church, certainly more high church than the Baptists, who outnumbered us 10-1 in that community. But we still were pretty basic King James Bible, the Bible said it, so I believe it, Christians. And I grew up in a family that my grandparents or my parents were among the first people to unlock the door at the Methodist Church every Sunday morning. And we went to Sunday school and to church, and we sang in the choir, and we went back Sunday night for church and Wednesday night for church, and twice a year we had a week-long revival meeting where we went to church every night. Plus the children and teenagers had an hour of evangelism thrown at us even before the revival service. So, and my dad was also the most popular song leader, gospel song leader in our county. So even though we were Methodist, he was invited to lead the singing at all the Baptist revivals too. So we went to lots of that stuff. I grew up with all that. I also grew up with parents who were modern people born in the 20th century, and who had grown up in the 1930s and had gone to university and had studied things like science. And my mother, in fact, was a pre-med student who, as women did too often in those days, had to choose between going on to medical school or, you know what she did. And I had one grandfather who was a biblical fundamentalist who collected fossils because, in spite of what his saying the Bible is true exactly the way it's written, he would tell me about dinosaurs living millions of years ago and say, here are pieces of them. He was in Central Texas where you can pick those up on the ground without looking very hard. And all of that was going on. And I was faithful, and I knew God loved me, and I believed in Jesus, and I believed the Bible. And yet, even some of my school science teachers said, of course, what the textbook says here about all this evolutionary thing is really not correct, because it's clear from the Bible that God did the whole thing in 6 days. Now I'll date myself for sure. By the time I graduated from high school in 1957, the Russians had a little thing circling the Earth going beep, 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 beep. And there was a panic on the part of this country about us falling behind in science, behind the Russians, and no longer being number one country. And the big push was, you've got to send all your kids off to university to become scientists and engineers and mathematicians to save America. Well, I happen to be really good at math and really good at science and loved them both. And so I was headed off to the University of Texas in Austin, we now have to say, don't we, Vicki?
Outside the university.
To the university. To study chemistry. Now there was a problem, because by the time I was in high school, I was really having trouble with the fact that I was supposed to believe the Bible. And yet I didn't. Specifically, I did not believe Genesis. Specifically, I did not believe that the sun goes around the earth and the moon goes around the earth. I just didn't believe all that stuff. And I knew I had to, because it was in the Bible, if I was going to be a Christian. So I got to Austin and checked into my dorm and checked out of Christianity all in one day. And did not go to church, drove my poor Methodist grandmother crazy because I wasn't going to church. And I was at least honest enough to tell her I wasn't going. That I was just fine and dandy with all of that. And I was studying biology, and we did a whole section on evolutionary theory, and I was studying chemistry, and I was taking my first physics courses and all this stuff, and also reading lots of science fiction, which I discovered is so much more interesting than the Bible. But something wasn't quite right, because I'd grown up in the Christian faith. And finally, through a friend, visited an Episcopal Church for the first time in my life, where I really loved the way they worshiped, even though the elderly lady sitting next to me, she was probably 50, but I was 19, so she was elderly, noticed I was having trouble. Some of you may have experienced this with a hymnal and a prayer book and a service leaflet, and standing up when everybody knelt, and getting on my knees just as they stood back up. And so after a few minutes, she turned to me and she said, "May I help you?" She said. No, I mean really nicely. She said, "May I help you?" She said, "I'll tell you what, if you'll hold the hymnal, I'll hold the prayer book, and I'll show you where we are, and I'll whisper to you when we're about to change postures." And she did, and she helped me through it. So it was really great. But on top of it, my chemistry professor was all across the aisle, and the head of the Department of Biological Science at the University of Texas, who was teaching our courses on evolution, was sitting 2 rows in front of me. And I said, maybe both of these fit together. But the thing is, I had reached the point where I thought, I either have faith that it's all true the way the Bible says it, or if I have doubt, then that wipes it all out. And now I began on a journey, which in some ways I'm still going on, Mother Rebecca, sorting out faith and doubt. I think it's an ongoing thing. So, the New Testament, well, first of all, the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. Old Testament Hebrew has a vocabulary of about 6,000 words. Whew, that's a lot, right? New Testament Greek, that's what New Testament is written in, has a vocabulary of about 12,000 words. The English language has about, I think it's 600,000 now in the OED, something like that. Hundreds of thousands of words. And that means that if you're writing in Hebrew in the Old Testament, any Hebrew word you're going to use in English can have multiple dimensions of meaning. And likewise with the Greek New Testament. Now then, there are 2 words in the New Testament Greek that are both translated either believe or faith, either as a noun or a verb. They're related words. Both come from pisteo, thank you, from which epistemology comes from, in case you're a philosopher, okay. Belief and faith. But notice that believe is a verb, faith is a noun. But the same term carries those and a bunch of other things too. Maybe it's not as easy as I was told in Sunday school to know what it means by having faith as I thought. And on top of that, I was taught that faith is something you have. It is a thing. Okay? But I also was told I had to believe, which is something you do. And what do you have to believe? The true faith. Right. Okay? There, we've got it. So what you got to do is pisteo, the true pisteo. Wait. Not quite, because it has a different ending depending on whether it's a verb or a noun. But this is the first thing to have in mind. And when people translate the Bible from Greek into English, and then translate it from 16th century English into 19th century English, and now in the 20th century, about every 2 months, into another version of 21st century English, you have lots of people taking what they believe, of course they're correct, unlike everyone else before them, but what they think is the most accurate way of translating a word. And part of their notion of what it is has to do with things like what they were taught in Sunday school. If you're Roman Catholic, what the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church is. If you're Southern Baptist, what Dr. Jeffries says it is. Okay? And you carry that in. And it influences how you use and whether you choose to use the word faith or believe, and whether you're going to treat it as a noun or a verb. Because many places the word seems to be treating the English word faith as though it were a verb rather than a noun. That you faith. But we don't talk that way, do we? Have you been faithing lately? Okay? But it's treated that way. And believing, the verb can also imply belief, which is which is a noun, sort of like the noun faith. You really confused now?
Yes.
All right, Martin Luther says we're saved by grace through faith, faith alone, nothing else. And if you depend on things like good works, whether it's churchy good works or charitable good works, and think that will save you, it won't do. The only thing that will do is faith. So, here are some examples of faith as a noun. When you think of faith as a noun, it includes things like God is love, God is one, Jesus is God's Son, and and to love God is to love your neighbor. Those are faith statements, aren't they? Yeah. Okay. And lots more. The creed is packed with them, isn't it? God from God and light from light and true God from true God, whatever that means. But faith as a verb, or believing, in other words, but the underlying word in Greek can mean trust, adhere to, commit to, and act upon. Okay? So, what I just said about the verb, let's take John's summary of what Jesus is about in the first chapter of John. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son so that whoever believes in him will attain everlasting life. Okay? But believes in, trusts in, adheres to, commits to, acts like. All of those. So that whoever trusts in him, whoever adheres to him, whoever commits to him, whoever acts like him will attain everlasting life. There's another little subtlety, by the way, which I'm not going to get into, and that is we also are told that we must have, because we're quoting straight from the Bible, we must have faith in Jesus, right? We're told that. But the Bible phrase, translated from the Greek, can equally mean the faith of Jesus. You're to have the faith of Jesus. Now, how's that different? Okay. I'm just throwing all this out because I'm going to get on now to doubt. Doubt is what I did when I questioned whether the Christian faith was true, because I was told that the package it came in had to be true for the Christian faith to be true, and I was quite certain that God didn't create the world in 6 days, and that the sun did not circle around the earth, and that men were not inherently superior to women, and that there were more ways of being a human being than the standard old traditional male roles and female roles. And all of those seem to be challenging faith if faith means believing all of those things. And so I was doubting. And I assumed, because I've been told this always, that the opposite of faith is doubt. And if I doubted anything, and have you ever been told this? If you doubt anything in the Christian faith, then you don't have faith? Anybody heard some version of that? Mm-hmm. I heard it from really sweet ladies in Sunday school. One of them, grandson, married into my family, and I have to remind her that when I was in first grade Sunday school, she kicked me out of class because I argued with her that God did not create human beings out of the earth, but that He created them out of apes. And she said, "I didn't kick you out because I thought you were wrong, but you were talking back to your teacher." I was a wise-ass 6-year-old. I still am. Often a 6-year-old, too. But several writers who I like, and in particular Diana Butler Bass. Anyone heard of her? If you haven't, she's a really great writer about Christian faith. Paul Tillich, perhaps the greatest Protestant theologian of the 20th century. John Westerhoff, an Episcopal theologian and teacher. All have said, and I think at least two of them are stealing from one of the others, but I don't know which, that the opposite of faith is not doubt. Can anybody suggest to me something else that would be the opposite of faith?
Fear. Rejection.
That's not a bad one. Hold on to that. Yes?
Certainty.
What?
Certainty.
Certainty? Certainly. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stick with those two, but there are some others. But the opposite of faith is fear. Well, I'm afraid all the time. Does that mean I don't have fear? I'm afraid of things often. I put it that way, not all the time. Though lately, no. Does that mean I don't have faith?
No, not necessarily.
Mm-mm.
It just
No, it
means you've turned away from the faith.
Yeah. No, it probably means you don't have faith in those things that you're afraid of. It doesn't mean you don't have any kind of
Okay, yeah. Like that Beelzebub character Jesus talked about. And certainty. So, why would you think that it would be correct to say that the opposite of faith is certainty?
you can't prove it.
Pardon?
You can't prove it.
You can't prove it. Can you sit down and work it out like you do a mathematical formula? Can you test it? Well, there's one way to test it. Live it. And when you're dead, you'll find out if you were right. Well, I'll tell you a story of faith. Here's a rabbinic story. In the book of Exodus, the people of Israel, led by Moses, come to the shore of the sea, and the Egyptian army is hot after them, and God says to Moses, stick out your staff and strike the waters of the sea, and the waters will divide. And Exodus goes ahead and says, and the waters divided, and they went through. But the rabbis have rabbis like to embroider on Bible stories to get more at the more subtle meanings of them. And in this story, this rabbinic story, all of this happens the way it says in the Bible, and God gives them enough time to get across by putting the pillar of cloud and fire behind them, between them and the Egyptians and everything. But everybody's saying to Moses, hurry, hurry. And he puts his staff out and nothing happens. Until one ordinary Hebrew steps into the sea and starts going in, and the waters go up, 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 and then the sea divides. That's a rabbinic explanation of what faith is. Now, was that guy saying, I know once I walk in till it's over my head, the water's going to divide? Of course not. He said, I hope to hell this is going to work. Right? Because I don't know, I can't swim. I don't know what I'm going to do once it's over my head. It's almost like the man is saying, okay, God, I dare you. Okay, prove it, God. I'm going to go through it. The first time I heard that story, I did get to hear it from a rabbi who was meeting with a group of Christian pastors helping us read the Bible, because knowledgeable Jewish rabbis know that if we were only studied rabbinic studies first, we could understand our New Testament a whole lot better and understand Jesus a whole lot better. What's her name? There is a woman, Jewish scholar.
Amy Jill Levine. That's right.
Amy Jill Levine. Read her
Annotated New Testament.
her annotated New Testament.
I think it's called the Jewish Annotated.
Thank you. Yes, and didn't she also write a book called The Jewish Jesus?
Yes, maybe.
I think, yeah. Is that correct? I think that, but it's Amy Jill Levine. She teaches in a Protestant Christian seminary, teaches rabbinic studies, and teaches the Bible to Christians. Okay? Because our faith is so much more subtle than the fundamental literalism that we've inherited from a perfectly awful movement that happened, and it's the fault of the English-speaking people in North America and in Great Britain. We did it. And we started a thing led by a man named George Whitefield in England, and by a whole crowd of people who influenced in North America in two big events, one in the 17th century and one in the 18th century, called Great Awakenings. And they were reacting, among other things, in the 17th century to the discoveries of Galileo and Newton, which questioned parts of what the Bible said, and then in the 19th century by you-know-who, Charles Darwin. And they said, you're either a believer and therefore saved, or you question the Bible. But you can't be both. And it's written the way it's written. the way, and there is no other way around it. If it says that it was God's will for Joshua and his crowd, once they entered the promised land, to slaughter, literally kill every single living person who wasn't a member of the 12 tribes of Israel, that was the will of God. And if you don't believe that, you don't have faith. I mean, now then your Baptist friend down the street doesn't believe that at all. I hope. But, you know, our ancestors, our Anglo-Saxon, Anglo and European ancestors on the North American continent, many of them used as their proof text from the Bible, beginning in 1620, used as their proof text the accounts in the book of Judges about God's requirement that the Canaanites be expunged from the land, and the first settlers in Massachusetts Bay Colony and Virginia Colony referred to the native people as Canaanites. And they had entered into the new promised land, and like Joshua of old, they were to exterminate the unbelievers. You see, and yet I'm still a Christian, and I still believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and that if he isn't true, I don't see why we should all keep going. A friend of mine used to say, here's my personal creed. God is real, Jesus is true, and I believe this. Love always conquers, and I believe this is true because the Bible told me so. Tells me so. And some Sundays I wish we could just say that instead of the Nicene Creed. Now I'm about to use up my time, aren't I, Mother Rebecca? That was a very subtle way you got up and started walking around. I have some discussion questions. And if I get you to get up and all move and move your furniture and everything else, it's going to take most of our discussion time to move. If I leave you to form up little circles of no more than 12, but preferably no more than 4 or 5, it will get noisy, and so you'll have to listen carefully to each other. All right? So let's do that. You form up a little group of about 6 around you, okay? You form up a little group around, say like around in here. Could you carry that over and get that group to join in with you? And maybe some of you go over that way. And I know my syntax in some of these questions is not very good because I wrote these early this morning. I knew what I meant, but it may not be clear. So your first job is to parse my meaning.
Careful of the folks back there. Folks back there. Folks back there.